Hi everyone, it's Monica, and welcome to day 5 of 12 Days of Christmas. Well, today I'm going to be creating for you a mixed media card, and I haven't created a mixed media card on YouTube in such a long time. I know a lot of you are very intimidated by this type of a card, but I want to show you how easy it is to create a really whimsical background just using a few products. And as you can see, not only did I use some distress inks, but I did some stamping. I also used some actual vintage green stamps, and then of course I used one of those little paper dolls. Now, the washi tape that I'm going to be using is the really thin washi tape. I don't know if any of you still have that. This is something that Tim Holtz came out with when he first introduced his washi tape. But this is great for mixed media cards. It's really thin. It tears really easily. And this is typically what I'll use for my background. Now, not to say that you can't use your normal washi tape, because I'm going to show you how to mute it out using some acrylic gesso. So even if you don't have the thin washi transparent tape, you can still do this technique. We're also going to be working with some of the distress inks as well as the distress oxides. And I'm going to be showing you how to add some of this color to your background using a brayer. I know a lot of us have done the technique where you put the ink on your work area and you spritz it, and then you dab your white cardstock to the ink. But that's not what we're going to do here, because I want to just have more of a subtle background. And when you use a brayer, you are going to get more of a subtle background. You're not going to get as much ink on your cardstock, and that's really what we're going for here. We want a lot of the white to still show through, because we're going to be doing some stamping and we're going to be adding some other items. So with the brayer, you still get the benefit of the color without it actually taking over your background. So as you can see, there's really not much to this technique. All you're doing is swiping your color on your work area, and then you're spritzing it, and then you're taking your brayer, rolling it through the ink, and then adding it to your white cardstock. And as you can see the layers build, you can see that you are getting some color, but it's not as dramatic as it would be if you were actually dabbing your white cardstock into the ink directly. Now, I'm only going to be working with 3 colors, but you can certainly do as many colors as you want until you get your desired background. Like I said, we're going to be adding not only some stamps, but we're going to be also adding some of that tissue paper and some other items. So I wanted to make sure that my white background showed through. Okay, so if you use more than just a couple of colors, your white cardstock might be a little bit damp. So if you do need to take a heating tool to it, just do that for a couple of seconds and you should be good to go. Now we're going to go ahead and start on the tissue tape. And this is a really easy design. You're just going to have 2 tapes going vertically and 2 tapes going horizontally. And we're going to kind of weave them. The tissue tape doesn't stick down very hard, so it's easy to go ahead and re-lift it up and weave it through. And this is just a real easy design. It's something that I've done with not only cards, but also bigger items as well. And I really like the look of that, because it kind of gives you a little bit of a frame, leaving you some white space to work with as well. Now, like I said, I have a lot of this tissue tape. I've hoarded it over the last several of years because I really like it. So I have a lot of tape that really complements each other. And it is something, like I said, that I like to work with. I use it on some of my packaging. I use it on cards, and I also use it on bigger items as well. But you can still find it out there. You can find it, I believe, on Amazon. And I've also seen some people have it in their Etsy shops as well. So when I do link up my product below, I'll see if I can find some for you. So if you do want to use some of this tissue tape, you'll be able to find it. All right, now the water brush that I'm using is the type of water brush that you put water inside of the tube, and then you can squeeze it and the water will come out. And I like using these types of brushes when I'm working with gesso. Now, of course, you can easily just use a regular paintbrush and then just dip it into water, but I like that I can control the amount of water that's coming out. So if your gesso is a little bit too thick, you can thin it out using water. And as you can see, by adding the gesso, it really gives it a nice muted result. So if you are using some of the actual washi tape rather than tissue tape, then you can easily mute it down. So don't be afraid to get your washi tape out, even if it is a little bit darker, because you'll be able to add that gesso over to give it more of a muted result. Okay, so once you have your gesso all over your card, if you want to add a little bit more color, you can certainly do this. You can just continue to layer it till you get your desired result. Now, instead of actually using my brayer this time, I wanted to have a little bit more of a controlled coverage, and I wanted to show you how I did that. This is just a mixed media sponge that I had in my stash, and all I did was just rub it on my ink and then just have a little bit more control over where I was putting the ink. And then I went ahead and I spritzed the card because again, we are working with the distress inks and those react really nicely with water. So I went ahead and I just spritzed it and then I used my brayer to roll over it. So if you do want to have a little bit more control over where you're putting your color, that's an idea that you can use as well. Another way to control where your color is going is using your distress crayons. With your distress crayon, you can just basically just write exactly where you want your color to go. And distress crayons also rub in really nicely, especially when you have some gesso on your background for primer. So the oils in your skin will help move some of that distress crayon, but if you do need to add a little bit of water to help get some of that movement, you can certainly do that as well. And as you can see, all I'm doing is I'm just kind of outlining where the tissue tape is, just to give it a little bit more of a pattern. So while I do like that my background is pretty random, when I am creating these backgrounds, of course, I want to have some control over what I'm doing, and this is an easy way to do that. Like I said, the crayons, you can easily just draw where you want them to go. You can rub them and smear them with your fingers. You can also use a wet paintbrush, or you can even use a sponge like I'm doing here. Okay, so our first layer was, of course, the ink colors, and we wanted to create some color on our background. Now we're going to get a little bit more specific, and we're going to be using some stamps. Now, there are tons of stamps out there, you guys, to create backgrounds. And just because it is a distinct stamp and not particularly a background stamp doesn't mean you can't use it as a background stamp. I'm just kind of going through some of my stamps here, and I'm showing you lots of stamps that will work for background stamps. So go through your stamp sets, see what you have, and then kind of get an idea of where you want to go with your pattern. You want to make sure that it isn't too random, that it doesn't look cohesive, but certainly there are a lot of choices and a lot of decisions that you can go with out there for your backgrounds. Now this splatter stamp is a stamp that came in one of the Halloween sets a couple of years ago, and this is one of the Tim Holtz sets, and I was really happy when I saw that Tim added this splatter stamp because it works for so many different types of designs. So it's definitely one that I use often. And then here's another stamp that is, I think it's a ledger, and it's again from one of the Tim Holtz stamps, and as you can see, I love these oversized stamps because I can hold them in my hand and then I can control exactly where I'm stamping. I'm not getting the full impression, as you can see. I'm just getting some ink on some of the stamp and then I'm pressing down because I want my background to be random. Now, while I like some of my stamps to be random, there are some stamps that I want to be a little bit more distinct. And this is when I pull out my MISTI to make sure that I get nice, crisp impressions. This little film strip stamp is from one of my stamp sets, and again, I'll make sure I list all of my stamp sets that I've used below. But this is a really great one for some of these backgrounds because even though it is a very distinct stamp, it does add to some randomness just because of the way that it's created. And I love using this little stamp set just to kind of add to my background. And I don't know if you noticed that on the tissue tape, it had Admit 1, and I decided to use my Admit 1 stamp also, just to kind of complement the tissue tape. So even though I am going random, there is some thought behind what I'm actually stamping onto my paper. And when I actually go to add some of my layers, I'll make sure that I don't cover this up because this is part of the card that I want showing through. So when you're creating your background, if there is a particular stamp that you want to make sure is showing and doesn't get covered, then be strategic about your layout. You can certainly get your background complete, which is, you know, the random colors and the random stamping. But then when you actually start to finish off the design, you want to be a little strategic about where you're going to be stamping and think about where you're going to be putting some of your layers so you don't cover them up. Now at this point, the card really doesn't look like a Christmas card, does it? So I want to go ahead and add some snowflakes, and let's try to turn this into more of a Christmas card. At this point, it's been very random. It could easily be any type of card at this point, but we're going to go ahead and start adding some of those Christmas elements to transition it into a Christmas card. Now, when I create these backgrounds, to me, it's just playtime. I just love getting out my ink and trying different types of layers and different types of designs. And this is something that you can just do in an evening. You can just get some of your white cardstock and then mat it onto some black cardstock so that way it's nice and heavy. And then just play with your colors. Like I said, up to this point, before we started adding the snowflakes, this card could have gone anywhere. It could have been a Christmas card. It could have been a retirement card, a birthday card. There's lots of directions that you could take it. So you could easily sit down, one evening and just play with your inks. Just create some backgrounds. And then that way you have your backgrounds all ready to go. And when you need a card, you can just transition it into whatever type of card you need. Okay, so the stamp set or the stamp sentiment that we're going to be using is from an older stamp set, and this is the Christmas Classic stamp set. And this is the stamp set that has that really jolly Santa Claus. It's the Santa Claus is one of my favorite stamps, and I usually use it every Christmas, but I told myself I wasn't going to do it on a video this year because I have so many already in my video archives. But the Christmas sentiment is perfect for this card. As you can see, even though I am stamping over the tissue tape, I've muted it enough where you're going to be able to see the Christmas sentiment very easily. It is going to take a couple of stamps with my MISTI, but I'm going to be able to get a nice crisp impression in just a moment here. And if you're not familiar with this stamp set, this stamp set has the big Christmas, but then it also has some smaller words. It has the word magic, it has the word cheer, wishes, and it also has the word merry. So there's a lot of combinations that you can use for your sentiment. Now I decided to go ahead and use the word cheer, and my Christmas sentiment will be Christmas cheer. So now you can see while I was creating my background, I did leave that white space there because I knew that my sentiment would be more towards the right side of the card. So again, when you are placing your color, you don't want to have it too dark where you're going to have your sentiment. You can certainly stamp over ink. I'm not saying you can't do that. But if it's too busy with washi tape and with ink and with words, then your sentiment may not be clear enough to be able to read it. All right, so we're getting to the end of the card here. I'm just going to add a few more items to just add a little bit more color and a little bit more vintage. Now, these are actual green stamps that I have in my collection, and I have a video that I'm going to be sharing with you creating some tags using some of these in the next day or so. But I did have these on my desk, so I decided to go ahead and add these to the card just to add a little bit more color. And then I'm going to be using this Mod Podge, which is the antique Mod Podge, which not only works as an adhesive, but it will also give it a little bit of a vintage tone. Now, I suppose I could have easily looked at these green stamps, but these are really old green stamps, and I don't know where they've actually been, so I wasn't about to put my tongue on them. So I'm just using my wet paintbrush to add some moisture, and then I'm adhering them, and then again, I'm using some of my Mod Podge to go ahead and help secure it down. And then I'm bringing in my heating tool just to dry it and make sure that it's nice and dry, and that my green stamps won't fall off. And then as a final addition, we are going to be adding one of my favorite types of embellishments, and these of course are the paper dolls. And you've seen me use these paper dolls in so many of my cards. The set that I'm using is the Christmas set, and these have more of a winter type of character. They have all these nice big coats, they have mittens, they have hats and gloves. And there's lots of choices for your card. I also want to show you how I color up some of my paper dolls. Really easy to do this, you guys. I know a lot of people think it's really difficult to color up some of your paper dolls, but I'm going to show you a couple ways that you can do this. Now, I've colored my paper dolls several ways. I've used distress inks before using a paintbrush. I've used my distress crayons, but I also wanted to show you another way to color up your paper doll, which I don't think I've shared with you before. And this is using a Pit Artist pen by Faber-Castell. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to glue down my paper dolls. And again, I can't stress enough how much I love this new glue that I'm working with, which is the Fabri-Tac permanent adhesive glue. I swore by my ATG gun before, but using this wet adhesive has been great because I've been able to actually continue to move some of my items that I placed down until I get them exactly where I need them. So yes, I am giving a shout out to this Beacon Fabri-Tac, and I will link it below because I think it is a great glue and I love working with it. I get mine at Joann's, so I'm able to get 50% off. It's not cheap. It's probably about $13. But if you use your coupon, then it makes it a really nice price point. All right, so enough for my public announcement. Now, these are the Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pens, and I only have a few colors. I got these back when I was working on my art journals, which I think I'm going to start doing again next year because I did enjoy my art journals. But these pens are great because you can just add color, and they smear really nicely. They're not well, they are a permanent ink, don't get me wrong, but when you add them to your image, you're able to smear them to add more color to create some of a color background, I guess is what you want to say. And they work really nicely. Now, like I said, you can also use your distress crayons, but with your distress crayons, you're going to have to add some water to it. So just get out your paintbrush, wet it a little bit, and then you can add some color to your paper dolls as well. And as you can see, my little girl has a little pink jacket now, and then the mother has sort of a green tinge jacket. So it's just enough color to make it not look like a black and white image. And then I ended up adding one last element. I probably should have stopped here because my after results weren't exactly what I wanted them to be, but I have some of those gold flakes from Tonic that I don't use very often, and I probably don't use them correctly. But I wanted to go ahead and see if I could add a little bit of gold flakes to my background. Now I'm using a fine tip glue pen, and you want to be real careful when you do this because if you add too much glue or too much adhesive, you're just going to get a clump of gold, and that's what I ended up getting. But I ended up covering a little bit, and it ended up being fine. But if anybody has any suggestions on how to use these gold flakes, I'd appreciate it because all I end up with is gold clumps. And with that, my card was complete. So I hope that I've given you some ideas on how to create a mixed media card. I know a lot of you are intimidated with this type of a background, but hopefully I've given you some step-by-step ideas and a process to get you through your intimidation. So as always, I'll leave a list of all the products that I've used to create the card along with the links to the stores. If you've enjoyed my video, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Now, if you want to be entered into my drawing, don't forget to leave me a comment and let me know what you thought about today's cards. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you in a couple days.